Hi, I'm Rachel, here to cover my reading around the weekend of the 23rd and 24th of February 2018. It's really a weird way of saying it. I've basically been trying to read two books in the week, and so I read one during the week and I scrambled through the other mostly during the weekend. So this is what I read during the week. This is Young Jane Young by Gabrielle Zevin. This is a story about a young woman, Aviva Grossman, who gets involved in an affair with her congressman, who is also her boss. She's a political intern in Florida around the time of 9/11, which the scandal about her relationship with the congressman breaks a few months before 9/11, so there's a few months of a media circus before she's sort of forgotten, but then she also lives on in infamy, and the event rather ruins her life. I mean, because afterwards she's not able to get a job because once people Google her name, they're just not willing to work with someone who has that amount of shame put on her about being involved in an affair with a married man and a congressman and, you know, so forth. I mean, so this novel is about the aftermath more than the actual affair. And we flit around between characters, mostly taking place like decades after the affair, and about how the media circus, really more than the affair, has hugely impacted their lives. We start with Aviva's mother, Rachel Shapiro, and talk about her as a middle-aged woman and about her dating life and how, you know, her daughter's still treated as a laughingstock, you know, for her. And we go to Aviva's alter ego, because basically what I mean to say is that she had to change her name and move across the country in order to get a job and to support herself. And she has a young daughter and she's working as an event planner. And we go into her life in Maine and how she's doing and how she sort of interacts with the past and tries to move forward and what she tries to impart to her daughter. And then we go to Ruby, her daughter, who actually finds out about her mother's secret past and talks about it in emails, and it really sort of shatters her, this, you know, shocking secret history, the sexual scandal and all of that. And then we see the congressman's wife. The congressman, of course, has very little by way of long-standing after effect of the affair, and he's still in office all these years later, and he's still married all these years later, and it's interesting to get her perspective. And finally, it ends with a choose-your-own-adventure story, which I was kind of concerned that it would be a real one, but I like how the choose-your-own-adventure story played out, because it's not actually choosing different paths, it's thinking about what those different choices she could have made might have been, but then, you know, you go forward with what she did choose to do. And so it's a interesting look at hindsight. This novel, I feel like I used the word shallow in my my Goodreads review, and you know, that comes with all sorts of negative connotations, but I did notice that it was pretty light on interior dialogue and nuanced motivations. It sort of skimmed the surface of this is what's happening and this is how it affects people. It's very on the surface of that. There's an irreverent and comedic style, and it pulls no punches. I mean, I guess I called it an issues novel because it's about how the world treats women. I mean, mostly with this affair and how women are slut-shamed for bad sexual behavior. But there's also a lot of bad dudes in here. You know, there's just scumbags that you're dating, and scumbags in politics, and scumbag misogynistic taxi drivers. I mean, I suppose some people would dislike this because in terms of male characters, there aren't a lot of really good ones, but at the same time I think Zevin touches upon a lot of stuff that women have to deal with in day-to-day life, in interactions with some members of the opposite sex. So I really liked it. I especially liked the Choose Your Own Adventure and how that dealt with the aspect of hindsight. I thought in terms of writing, the weakest part was Ruby's part. Not so much, I don't know, her reaction, which was very extreme, but I thought to myself that, especially at that age, learning something that really upends your life is pretty damaging. But, it's told in the form of emails that she's writing to a pen pal, and, well, the pen pal's a non-entity. We don't really hear much about her and nothing from her. And Ruby ends up writing long, detailed dialogue scenes, basically to advance the story, and I thought, that's not how anybody writes emails. Zevin's doing this because she kind of has to for narrative purposes, but, it's not realistic, so I thought that was the weakest part. I mean, in terms of literary fiction, I don't know. I think people use this word in all sorts of ways, and I think in terms of writing, there isn't enough of that nuance, interior motivation for it to be in the upper echelons of literature, and I do think it's a novel more about issues and about themes, because it's about sex scandals and how women are treated by men in the public life, and it sort of just stays on the surface of that, rather than going into more complexities of character and all of that. But I still think that it addressed these issues in ways that I hadn't seen before, and it's, I think, an important perspective to read about. I think that it was a unique reading experience for me, and that's always worth something. I feel like I should have more to say about this book. Surely there's just a lot going on here, but I just finished it. I might have moved too fast with it, this whole Virginia Woolf project, trying to get through so many books in a month. I don't know. Anyway, this is Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I really just finished it. I read the bulk of the book today. There is so much going on. We are covering 300 plus years of history. This is a book about a young person in England who starts out his life as a boy and ends it as a woman. We start with him as a courtier in Elizabethan England. He lives in his manor at home for a while, trying to write poetry and getting burned by a poet, getting burned by a lover, then ending up as an ambassador in Turkey, where ultimately a bunch of magic happens and he's turned into a woman, and then then she spends time with gypsies, the Romani in I guess in Turkey, and then she leaves to go back home, and like by this point, well, hundreds of years are passing, and she's still continuing to write poetry, but a lot of the professional life is now closed to her. She makes social calls in the Reformation age, I suppose it was, and then the darkness of the Victorian era settles upon the land. You can tell how much Virginia Woolf hated the Victorian period, and from there's some attempts at courtship. There's an ultimate marriage. We go forward in time to the modern day, which is 1928. And her poetry is ultimately received well, where, back when she started it, it wasn't. This is a novel in large part about history, and it shows a side of history that is very female, I would say, because it's not about wars and technology. I mean, there's very minimal references to that. It's about how the streets of London change. It's about the differences in sounds and smells and sights and clothing and behaviors. And certainly it's about the differences in behavior between men and women, and how Orlando ultimately encompasses both of them. Orlando is based off of Virginia Woolf's lover, Vita Sackville West, to whom she dedicated the novel. I was able to do a little bit of research, and it gave a bit of insight into certain particulars of the novel, like there's a goose that shows up a lot of the time, which is a metaphor for Orlando slash Sackville West trying to chase the idea of writing an amazing novel. There's when Orlando is a man, he takes up with a gypsy woman, I suppose it's supposed to be, and has children with her. And there's a subplot about how his ancestral home is almost taken from him, but then ultimately he's able to get it back. And that mirrors how Sackville West also was born into an aristocratic old historical family, and she wasn't able to inherit her her long-standing family home because she was a woman. And also, apparently Sackville West had a infatuation with the Romani people and thought about wanting to live the nomadic lifestyle, and Woolf rolled her eyes, I think, a little bit at that, like, oh, you would not be able to handle leaving your stately house and all of that. So that's basically what Orlando goes through here. And Sackville West also lived in Constantinople because her husband was a politician there, and so was Orlando as a man. And then he turns into a woman there. And I mean, there was an interesting note, I guess, in the Wikipedia article about how maybe Woolf chose for that transformation to take place there because Constantinople was known as a melting pot of different cultures and different types of people, so things were a little freer to change form. And certainly when Orlando lived as a gypsy, there was talk about how women and men shared similar styles of clothing and work, and that there was more of a jarring effect when Orlando the woman went home to England, and then she had to be different than Orlando the man. This was a way to talk about sexuality without being blatant about homosexuality. I mean, it's a novel that has a science fiction premise, but it's one of those things that doesn't care at all about the world building, like, oh, are we going to explain how some people are living for 500 years or 300 years and only aging 6 years in all of that time, and why some people aren't, and and how exactly this sexual transformation took place, like their spirits of affects of truth and chastity and modesty that are like warring for the soul of Orlando during this time, which also took place, I guess, during the ascent of the British Empire and sort of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which, Constantinople is the seat of the Ottoman Empire. I was intrigued, I guess hopefully, by the fact that, for all of the eye-rolling at the nomadic lifestyle to a degree, Woolf did seem to posit through her characters that there was something to be said of this lifestyle, that there was a long history to the Romani people, that the English, for all of their gloating about, aristocracy going back to the Crusades, couldn't touch the long history of these tribes of Romani people. And there were certainly some things I picked up about that were critical of slavery and imperialism. Although this novel started with a very brutal image of Orlando as a boy playing with the severed head of a Moor that his father cut off. And there's just no talk or real depth given to the fact that we're cutting off the head of a black person, possibly a Muslim person. I mean, it's just somebody who is just sort of shrugged off as, well, they're a savage and whatever, and she uses worse words, and it was very jarring. And I mean, certainly, I've seen research point to Woolf existing within the racism and anti-Semitism of her time, but to me, I mean, I guess it's so jarring to just, unquestioningly look at this horrible racist violence, and I'm trying to figure out where it fits into the story, and it sort of fits into what Woolf, I guess, is saying about male behaviors. There's so much, especially, I guess, in the Elizabethan era, but also in other eras, about men being people who killed things. That's what it is to be a man. You take a sword and you run things through. And there was a romance to that doesn't exist as much anymore. And it's just so strange because Woolf is much more sympathetic to female desires and behaviors, I think, because she's looking for women to have a seat at the table of literature and arts. But anyway, I think that I just found that to be too jarring, just sort of that unquestioned violent racism, and but otherwise I definitely found this book easier to follow than the other two that I read this month, and one that I should read again to get into the nuances of all of this interior monologue about all of these identities that Orlando was able to go through, and what that says about human nature, and in a way I guess she's also trying to posit that, you know, maybe men and women aren't so different, or maybe men and women can have both of these male and female attributes in them. I think Sackville West said that about herself, about feeling that way, and I said I wouldn't ramble, but I did. Also, occasionally there's like this affectation of this being a biography, and the we voice from the modern day of the 1920s coming in to say this or that about poetry or about manners or so forth. And it also, I guess, trying to go with the memoir theme, this copy of my book includes pictures. Like, here's Orlando as an ambassador and a man in Turkey, in Constantinople. And here's Orlando as a woman after returning to England post-Romani adventure. Okay, I won't talk about this one as much, thank goodness, because I haven't started reading it, so I can't say anything much at all, and I don't even think I'm going to be able to start it until next month, alas. My Virginia Woolf project of February, I believe, is at its end. But in early March, I will get to the next published Virginia Woolf book, novel anyway, The Years, and I'll read from the back about this one. One of Virginia Woolf's most ambitious and beautifully written novels, The Years offers a glimpse into the lives of an upper-class English family at the turn of the century. The story begins on a day in 1880 when the house of Colonel Abel Pargeter, whose wife lies still, gradually slipping into death before the eyes of their 7 anxious children. It becomes clear that each family member is uniquely affected by the deaths, births, marriages, and wars that happen in life. But it is though the commonplace moments captured here in a sequence of perfectly drawn scenes that the essence of each character is revealed. As the large cast of characters come and go, meet, talk, think, dream, and inevitably grow older in a continuous ritual of life that eludes meaning, the oldest Partager asks, is there a pattern, a gigantic pattern momentarily perceptible? Oh, yeah, she is difficult to read. Yeah, there is no order in the madness. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I've been saying that about every book because this one, like with Orlando, the focus was on one individual who sort of kept a certain past and shape throughout the centuries, and this book seems to have the shape of a family around it, so that there's that sort of connection, and that I hope then that the relationships will be stable and firm too, even if, you know, they're complex and perhaps devoid of meaning. But it's a family domestic drama, maybe, I hope, going throughout the years, so I will report back. But the next book that I hope to read, my final of February, will be The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which I believe I've been pronouncing as sour, not thinking about to sow and sower. I received this book as part of a DC library scavenger hunt in September, back around Banned Books Week, where the DC library hid copies of 6 books of a dystopic theme that have been banned in one place or another. And so we all did this big scavenger hunt around various parts of the city. And I found this book at a used bookstore in Capitol Hill called Riverby Books. Very cozy little place. and I'm very excited to finally read some Octavia Butler, something I've been thinking about for a while, and certainly a good way to round out February as Black History Month, to read an African-American author. This book is about a minister's daughter who, in a I guess an apocalyptic or bad event that destroys her home, has to start out on her own. I'm hoping that it's intriguing and thoughtful and has a good fast pace to it so I can get through all these pages. Because I actually have a pretty busy week coming up. I had a busy weekend too. I went out to see friends all day basically on Saturday, and today I was doing a rehearsal, and then I was reading for my writing group, and then I was reading Orlando, and tomorrow I'm meeting with my writing group, and on Tuesday and Wednesday I am rehearsing for and performing in my synagogue's Purim spiel. We're doing a Lion King spoof. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, so that's going to take a lot of time all the way to the end of February, because I'm also working, alas. I've been loving getting through all the books I got through. I mean, if I'm able to get through this final book, that'll be 10 books in February, which, oh my goodness, I mean, I don't usually get through 10 books any month, let alone the shortest of the year. So I love holding myself accountable to like these 2 books a week and so forth, but at the same time, it's been kind of hard, I guess. And on that note, I pushed doing this video till really late because I had to finish Orlando, so I gotta go now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.